I want to pull the engine back out, but there's far too much stuff in the way, so let's fix that. Well, now that I have more room, it's time to pull this engine back out. So I found a new clearance issue that I did not expect to have. We seem to be having a lot of those around here. So the intake manifold on the 2AR goes here and kind of loops down and through the middle. And it actually hits here and doesn't seat properly. When it seats properly, it looks like it'll hit the sensor and potentially the actual actuator arm itself. I have two intakes here. This first one is actually the 1AR intake, and when I put it on, it kind of sits and doesn't actuate, won't sit down completely. And the issue is here that it's hitting the transfer case, which that is just a bolt hole. So I could cut that off entirely and that shouldn't be a problem. The actuator arm, I kind of figured I'd have to modify that anyway. The only thing that is my biggest issue is the sensor, because that's actually what lights up the dash to tell you the four-wheel drive is turned on. It works kind of the same way as like a reverse sensor. It's just a magnetic latch under here. And I know that the 2AR has a slightly smaller intake as well. I would sacrifice the slightly smaller intake if I had to. But that has the exact same issue. So I have been in contact with a Canadian fella on RAV4 World Forums because he actually put an E250F in his second gen, which has a 2AZ, which is a kind of similar motor to this. It's a little smaller, it's older than this. And he had some of the same problems. He could not fit the same vacuum actuator, just like I can't. What he did was he got some kind of electric actuator from GM, and he had it pull and push this mechanism anyway, just electrically. So it followed the same. He wired his own system in because the second gen didn't have anything, but I could piggyback that onto the existing system on this car. So this hole right here is the one that I'm tapping. I'm tapping it to a M12 by 1.25. That's probably overkill. It looks like an M10. You could tap it to an M10 and use that. But I have the helicoil repair kit, and that taper is the same size as this, so that should be a safe level. This is overkill, but, well, better than underkill. A little bit of grease on these threads on the tap. Take it slow. here's what I was talking about in the last video with the balance shaft. So if I've notched the oil pan around here, then the balance shaft carrier will be in the way. So I'm going to need to figure out a way to remove this entirely. I'll be able to just probably cap the oil feed and call it a day, and then just get shorter bolts here, and hopefully that should be good. So this is that oil feed for the balance shafts. Since I won't be using that, I'll plug that so I can have better oil pressure for the rest of the engine. Mark used either a tapered roller bearing or a ball. I'm using a... So I stuck my pin in the freezer. Hopefully that makes it press in easier. It would have been a slight interference fit anyway, so it'll lock in place just fine. Okay. You know what I expected, it doesn't go from far enough. It was the smallest pin I could get. Might have to take that to work and finish pressing that all the way down. Or put it on the mill and machine it flat. That's not something I use the grinder on. It's too precise of a fit. Could also drill the backside of this open a little more. It's right here, that passage. So if I drilled that open more, it would sit down all the way. Okay, I'm out of brake clean, so this better work. There we go. Alright, that's happy. If I cut it, I'll cut it here. That should still cover that feed just fine. Yeah, okay, cool. So we're broken back down all the way. I don't know how stupid of an idea this is to pull the crank with the piston staying in. It should be completely doable. I don't see any reason it wouldn't be. So here's what I ended up coming up with for the balance shaft deleting. What I ended up doing was cutting off right here on the bandsaw. There was 2 extra bolts, these 2. But the rest I left alone, and I drilled a couple holes, several, to help with draining. So if I show you what that ends up looking like. Those 2 are now useless to me. Just like that. When it comes time where I have to notch my oil pan to make room for the exhaust here, that just gives me more room to notch the oil pan this way. Now I finally have my bearings from Toyota, so I can actually show what the difference is between the 2 styles. So this here is the quote-unquote old style bearing, and here's the new style. The only difference that I can tell is the new style has a coating on it. Everything is in the same locations, and by the book they have the same clearances. So it's completely possible that you could use entirely coated bearings on the new motor, or you could probably stick with entirely old bearings. Same story with the other bearing, coated versus uncoated. Again, you could probably use all coated bearings. Now, since we didn't assemble this thing completely, I have to take it all back apart to put the new bearings on. Now if you remember, I didn't torque any of these, so I'm just zipping them off with the impact. Now I don't think anything should be preventing me from lifting the crank out. Oh yeah. Alright, so the first step with this is going to be 15 foot-pounds. Starting with this, working your way out. And I've got to set them to 30 foot-pounds. Same torque sequence. Alright, final torque for these guys is to turn them 90 degrees. I just marked on the bolt head the closest to the, just basically pointing to the numbers here. Now the rods, same way, except we go straight to 30 foot-pounds on these. Alright, and 90 more degrees. Now since the valve train is in and not connected, I can't spin this over all the way, but normally you would check, make sure it spins freely and all that, but I can just rock it back and forth. It spins super smooth. So now the oil pan I'm going to breeze through since it's, well, it's an oil pan. Now the bottom half of the engine's assembled. Let's flip it and put the timing together. Easy enough. All the bolts of the same diameter, are the same size, except for this guy in the middle, and the engine mount bolts. Alright, so this thing's pretty much all back together. All the accessories are bolted on. A couple things I've solved since the last time I've touched this. I figured out that I could just run these bolts. They're M8 by 80 millimeters long. They don't fully engage the thread back there. I could have gone with a 90 or 85 or a 90 mil and been fine. I ran these thicker washers because the thinner ones were a little bit loose around the AC compressor housing. Another thing that's been solved is the thermostat housing. So this one was off of a, I believe, mid-90s Tacoma. And the issue with the stock one was that it goes too far forward. No matter which way you point it, it would hit the radiator. So this one, it's super low profile, so it's like directly parallel with the motor. And then I can just route it down here behind the AC compressor. So that should be easy, especially since I got that S13 radiator in there. The Tacoma, instead of being M6 studs, that had M8 studs. So luckily the stock housing for the AR has these steel inserts, and I just removed them from here, press them into here. I'll take them to the mill tomorrow and mill them down flat so that it actually clamps properly. I would bolt the header down all the way, but I seem to have misplaced my exhaust nuts. I did end up ordering a bunch of these copper locking studs, or nuts. They're specifically for exhaust. I don't know if they're multi-use though, so I'm not going to install them until I know I'm done with modifying this thing. So I'm not going to install those yet. And again, the reason I say I'm not done with the exhaust header is I'm going to cut this here and put a V-band instead of this massive flange. So here's the flywheel I'm using. This is a factory flywheel. I went with the factory weight flywheel because I wanted the heavier flywheel for being an off-road purpose. This one's used. It cost me 10 bucks, so I'm using it as is. As for the fasteners, I am using ARP hardware. This is 1032801. This is for the 2AZ, but I believe the bolt on the 2AZ is the same part number as the bolt for the 2AR, so that should be fine. So you're actually supposed to put Loctite on these, just a small amount, just 242, the blue stuff, and then their torque or their lubricant goes under the head. All right, those will all get torqued to 95 foot-pounds. I'm just using the old wrench trick to hold it in place. So I ended up finding what I believe is a better radiator than that Honda one. This is actually from a an S13 with an SR20. And it's about the exact dimensions as the RAV4, and in fact, fits in there just perfectly. However, it's a little bit taller, and that does present a slight problem. The hood doesn't close. And surprisingly, it's not actually because the latch is right here, but it's because of the secondary latch mechanism. The rod is in the way. So, I need to figure out a way to either change the rod or change the second latch mechanism.